is China following the Japanese path? And ever since Chinese housing bubble burst, I've been getting tons of calls from Chinese journalists, economists, investors, sometimes policymakers asking me, are we going the way of Japan? Are we going the way of Japan? And some of you might have noticed that last week I did one event, and that thing went viral in China. 600,000 downloads in like 2 days about the topic that I'm going to share with you right now, because it's not fair that the people in China knows what I'm talking about and people here doesn't know what I'm talking about. So I'll try to explain how I view this Chinese situation relative to what Japan went through 30 years ago. This is what happened to Japanese bubble. This is Japan's commercial real estate prices. In the Japanese case, it's the commercial real estate that led the bubble, and the housing was kind of secondary. And it went from 20 here to 100 in just 5 years. So Japanese commercial real estate prices went up 5 times in 5 years. So you can imagine how horrendous the bubble was. At the top of the bubble, they said the Imperial Palace Gardens in the middle of Tokyo was worth the entire state of California. That was the most ridiculous period that Japan was going through. But at that time, people felt rich, spent a lot of money, so GDP was going up very sharply as well, both in nominal and real terms. And then the bubble burst, and it came crashing down, fell to the level of 1973, 87% down nationwide, not just a little corner of Tokyo, the entire country. So just imagine in Taiwan, Taipei prices down 87, Xinbei down 87, Lugang down 87, Taichung down 87, Kaohsiung down 87, Pingtung down 87. What kind of economy you think you got left in Taiwan? Then you look at the Japanese, sorry. Look at the Japanese GDP, it never fell below the peak of the bubble, even though asset prices fell 87% nationwide. That's the most remarkable part of the Japanese experience, in my view. But it did have an impact on individual companies. And this is what happened to the corporate sector of Japan. Let me explain how this chart is put together. There's a horizontal line going across a 0. If the blue bars here goes further up, that means they're increasing their financial assets, bank accounts, bonds, whatever. If the orange bars goes further down, that means they're increasing their borrowings, issuing more bonds or borrowing more money from the bank. And the net number is this line with the small circles. This shows whether the corporate sector as a group is a net borrower or net saver. And if you look at the 80s, it's below 0, between 5 and 10%, minus 5 to minus 10%. That means corporate sector was busily borrowing money from the household sector and investing in all sorts of assets. And during this time, of course, Japan was at the top of the world, beating everybody. Then once the bubble burst, you see that suddenly this orange line starts shrinking very rapidly. By 1997, the orange bars above 0. Orange bars above 0 means they are actually paying down debt at 0 interest rates. By then, Japan has 0 interest rates. And by 1999, the whole line is above 0. So the entire corporate sector is paying down debt. And this is still with 0 interest rates. And that goes on for like 20 years. No one told us that companies are supposed to pay down debt at 0 interest rates, right? They should be borrowing money. But they're all busily repairing balance sheets. What that means is that during this period, Japanese companies could not use all their cash flow for new product development, more marketing efforts, more export markets. They had to use their cash flow to pay down debt. And that's why Japanese economy began to slow down. The momentum that Japanese companies had before were lost because so many companies had to use the cash flow to repair their balance sheets instead of developing new products, fighting in the new markets. And of course, that's where Taiwanese companies, South Korean companies came in to take over the Japanese market. So it did have an impact in slowing down Japan. One company, of course, was not affected by this, and that's Toyota. Toyota came out with this super sophisticated technology called hybrid technology and became the top auto companies very quickly. How did Toyota do that? And all the other ones, Nissan, Honda, start losing the lead. Very simple. Toyota had no debt. Toyota was screwed by the bankers 70 years ago. And the family said, this company will never borrow money, period. So none of this was affecting Toyota. So Toyota could use all their cash flow to develop hybrid technology, other technologies, and Toyota continued to do very well. But Nissan and others had to fight with these balance sheet problems. So that's why they fell behind. Well, most recently, the orange bars are below zero, so they are no longer paying down debt, which is good. But the net number is still above zero. Why? The balance sheet is already clean. How come they're still not borrowing? Well, as I said earlier, there's a trauma toward debt. They don't want to borrow money. And the second reason is that it's more profitable to borrow outside the country and invest outside. So that's why it's in this shape. But for Japan to really become a normal, strong economy, this one has to come down. That's when Japanese economy is really back to the textbook world. So that's what happened to the companies. So how did Japan manage to keep its GDP from falling? Well, government borrowed the money. And if the government borrowed the money, then the money comes back to the income stream, economy can move forward. So this chart shows who borrowed the money and who saved the money in Japan. There's a horizontal line going across zero. Above zero, the people saving money. Below zero are the people borrowing money. And there are four lines here: household line, corporate line, government line, and the rest of the world line. If you add the four lines together, you're supposed to get zero. That's how these things are put together. And as you can see, it is the corporate sector that screwed up Japan, in that during the bubble days, they borrow lots of money, this one. And then once the bubble burst, they realized that, oh my gosh, we have to repair our balance sheets. Then became the huge savers. Corporate sector was actually a bigger saver than the household sector during this period because their problem was just so large. But the government sector, the green line, went the opposite direction, and this is the part that kept the Japanese economy going. So the point is, if you're in this type of recession, you have to have a government borrowing and spending money. No other policy will work, whether it's a structural policy, monetary easing, none of those work because the problem is with balance sheets. Government has to come in and borrow. Now then you look at this with the Chinese data. This shows what happened to house prices in Beijing compared to what happened to house prices in Osaka and Tokyo area exactly 30 years earlier. And the magnitude of the bubble looks like it's about the same. And of course, recent numbers that's coming out of China, no one can trust anyway. But so the fact that a lot of people are saying house prices are falling, real estate prices are falling, suggests to me that China is already in a balance sheet recession. Because when that happens, and of course, we all hear that Chinese people are not borrowing money. They're actually paying down debt. So that also suggests that China is already in the balance sheet recession. But there is one huge difference between Japan and China. 30 years ago, when Japan was falling into the balance sheet recession, nobody had any idea what kind of recession we were faced with, including myself. Because we were never taught in universities this whole concept of balance sheet recession. So Japanese government tried this policy, that policy, see which one will work. None of them seems to work very well because we had no idea what disease is until I came up with the concept of balance sheet recession around 1997. But by then already, asset prices already collapsed. Today, Chinese are fully aware of this disease called balance sheet recession. As I was already mentioned earlier, I was told by a Chinese professor that nearly half of the PhD dissertations on economics written by Chinese students today are based on balance sheet recession. And I said to myself, I haven't got my PhD. How come these guys all are getting PhD based on my ideas? Only Taishin is giving me PhD because he always calls me doctor. But I don't have a doctorate degree, by the way. so this kind of article appears in Chinese newspapers. Ren Zhengfei and Gu Zhaoming, why the two, I have nothing to do with Mr. Ren Zhengfei, by the way. But the fact that this kind of articles showing up in a Chinese newspaper suggests to me that a lot of Chinese people are already aware of this disease called balance sheet recession and how to cure it. And so China is falling into balance sheet recession, but my guess is that they're going to put all the right policies in place and keep that in place long enough until this problem is over. So my guess is that as far as balance sheet recession is concerned, China is in a very good position because they know exactly what to do. And I hate to say this, but in fighting balance sheet recession, authoritarian government usually does a better job than democracies. Because in a democracy, if one side is for fiscal stimulus, the other side is always against fiscal stimulus, right? And they fight and fight and fight, and while all the time, economy is going down the drain. But if Mr. Xi Jinping gets the right advice, he can say, okay, do fiscal stimulus. In 20 minutes, this problem is over. And if the banking is a problem, and if he gets the right advice, put some capital into the banking system, and if Mr. Xi Jinping orders that, that's the end of the issue. Whereas in the United States or Japan, you could go on fighting and fighting for hours, days, weeks, months, and then the economy keeps on going down and down and down. So because China is an authoritarian state, if he gets the right advice, they can handle these problems relatively quickly. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but as far as this kind of recessions are concerned, they can often handle it better